The Monster Hunter series is one of Capcom's biggest franchises. Starting as a popular series in Japan with a cult following in Western markets, the games hit their stride when Monster Hunter World was released in 2018 and sold over 17 million copies worldwide. As with most popular IPs, the movie industry saw an opportunity to cash in. Naturally, gamers were filled with both excitement and dread, because, as history has taught us, video game-inspired films leave a lot to be desired, and that's putting it lightly. The issue stem primarily from the fact that these movies often take a game's established world, characters, and lore, only to toss them out the window. The Monster Hunter video games aren't terribly story-heavy. They have plenty of lore and mythology around the setting, sure, but there's no linear main storyline. At its core, the games are about exploring, grinding, getting bigger and better equipment, and taking down giant monsters. Before going on a hunt, the game encourages you to prepare by crafting healing items, picking up tools such as whetstones, and eating a hearty meal to buff up your stats. When you arrive at your mission location, you need to do some gathering for supplies and materials for future hunts, and once you finally down your prey, you can skin it and harvest its parts to upgrade your equipment. Unfortunately, the movie skims the surface with these aspects, while the plot and setting don't really lend themselves well to doing the hunter's life justice.
Monster Hunter is filled with characters from the game, like the Admiral, the Handler, the Palico. But if you know nothing of the game, you have very relatable characters that get you into the world.
Paul W.S. Anderson and his team had to figure out a way to inject some sort of plot into the film. In typical Hollywood fashion, they put the military in. And to make the film more relatable to audiences that aren't familiar with the games, they basically threw in an alternate dimension plot point to insert the military into a story about a monster hunting world. Following a brief prologue that sees a hunting party on the New World attacked by a Diablos, we're introduced to Milla Jovovich's Captain Artemis, a ranger and her team who is searching through the desert for missing soldiers. The main problem with Artemis is that, as a wholly original creation unrelated to the game, she's a strange person to ask fans to get on board with as the main character. It's basically Alice from Resident Evil all over again. Soon, an ominous storm rolls through and they're zapped into the otherworldly and fantastical setting of the games. After realizing they've left Earth, they're attacked by an enraged Diablos and a horde of Nasilla, leaving her as the only survivor. With the help of the Hunter, played by Ong Bak's Tony Jaa, who'd been assisting her unit from a distance, Artemis learns how to adapt in this new world. The key word being adapt, not survive, as just like Alice before her, Artemis is pretty much perfect.
All right, ladies, saddle up.
She has nowhere to go with regards to character development. She begins the movie as a strong and confident army ranger with an array of survival and combat skills, and ends the film in the same place.
Look, here. Food. It's good, right?
Chocolate!
Artemis and the Hunter have amazing chemistry, and the quieter moments between the two are some of the best the movie has to offer. Tony Jaa's Hunter is a great interpretation of the field team leader from Monster Hunter World. His armor matches that of his in-game counterpart, he wields the iconic giant jawblade, and Jaa's charisma is infectious. This leads us to one of the film's biggest problems. The Hunter is clearly the lead character, or at least he should be the audience surrogate in a film about hunting monsters. Every Monster Hunter game more or less follows the same core concept. You're a budding hunter who arrives at the village he or she is assigned and are looking to carve out a name for yourself. These villages are full of people who are counting on you to keep the peace. There's always a nasty elder monster of some kind that threatens to decimate the village entirely. This would have been such an amazing way to world build, but for some reason, all we get is an empty world without NPCs. In the games, you're assisted by various characters who cheer you throughout your journey and congratulate you on every victory. There's an air of grand epicness and positivity, even during darker moments, that's all but missing here. Artemis is supposed to come off as a hunter in training, as she receives mentoring and guidance from the hunter, but her motivations aren't the same. There's no village to protect, no giant eggs to fetch for the cooks, and no supply routes to make safe again. All we have is an outsider who wants to return to her own world. I did appreciate that the other characters who appear in the film at least look like their game counterparts, but that's as far as the similarities go. If the movie was interested in exploring them, we would have discovered that the girl with the goggles wasn't a hunter, but a handler. We would have also learned that Ron Perlman's character was in fact the Admiral, an essential character who leads a group called the Research Commission, tasked with learning more about the monsters and the world at large. The Admiral doesn't actually get a line until almost an hour into the movie, and for better or for worse, the handler certainly doesn't talk as much as she does in-game.
Enjoying the show.
It really doesn't make sense why these guys get shafted in favor of Artemis and a bunch of short-lived soldiers. Now, there's nothing wrong with adding new characters or story elements to a film, but seeing soldiers get ripped to shreds feels pretty far removed from what the games are about. The series is more focused on fantasy exploration as opposed to carnage and fear. There are certainly some frightening elements, some of the monsters are pretty terrifying, but overall, it's more about the wonder of trekking through the new world. That pioneering vibe isn't present in this movie, and while there are a few moments that allude to the feelings of discovery that make the game so great, like the scene where Artemis first lays her eyes on the Apsaros, or the moments where characters are crafting and cooking, they are few and far between.
Chocolate.
One of the most egregious ways the film fails to represent the Monster Hunter franchise is in the world itself. We talked a fair bit about what it means to be a hunter and their work in the assigned villages. The organization that deploys you there is called the Hunters Guild. In addition to allowing you to register and receive training, they're also responsible for giving you missions that escalate in terms of challenge and impact. As a central governing body of the MH world, the Guild's main goal is to preserve the ecosystem and keep civilians safe. Surprisingly enough, they're also responsible for ensuring certain species don't go extinct. To that effect, one of their main policies is that poaching is strictly forbidden. By only watching the film, you wouldn't have even guessed that such a governing body existed, nor that hunters also act as heroes and protectors. The film also doesn't give us a rich enough view of the world at large. Beyond the sandy dunes, the Nersilla's lair, and some ruins, we don't get to see any other biomes. This goes against the more varied terrains in the games, ranging from the luscious jungles, snowy mountains to lava-filled undergrounds. The view we get from the film is that the world is a dark and desolate place filled with giant, violent monsters, which doesn't really paint the whole picture. The ancient civilization is mentioned briefly in the movie, and they're one of the biggest mysteries of the Monster Hunter game universe. For those unfamiliar, they're basically a technologically advanced race known for capturing monsters and using them to fulfill their own societal needs. Something happened and these people became extinct. Notably, the ancient civilization built the Sky Corridor, a map location that can be found in Monster Hunter Frontier. In the movie, it's referred to as the Sky Tower, the very source behind the stormy rifts that threw Artemis into this new world. The full story behind the Sky Tower is only hinted at in this movie, and the after-credits scene reveals Meowscula's chef facing off against a hooded figure, perhaps even a living descendant of the ancient civilization. But the film does such a bad job at world building that you won't understand what's going on unless you've played the games. And if you played the games, it's unlikely that you would have made it to the post-credits.
So, catch 22.
After downing the Nersilla, Artemis and the Hunter rip off one of its claws to use against the Diablos. We also see the use of bait to lure monsters into a couple of traps, which is one of the most fun things you can do in the games.
Bait? You're funny.
From the desert-dwelling Diablos, the Nersilla, to the dark red-scaled flying dragon that is the Rathalos, one thing the movie nails is the creatures, who look and behave similar to their video game counterparts. The needlessly large weapons in the games are also easily another one of the franchise's most iconic elements that make an appearance. The giant bow and jawblade, both used by the Hunter, are a nod to the weapon switching dynamic in the games. We also see the grappling hook from Monster Hunter World, used primarily to traverse around the map and as a means of mounting monsters to deal heavy damage. Dual blades also make an appearance at the end when the hunting party and Artemis team up to defeat the Rathalos, but are utilized incorrectly. Artemis uses the fiery dual blades against the monster, but this is an incredibly poor weapon choice considering the creature is fire resistant. That's like splashing water at the ocean or sand at the desert. I was going to chalk it up to her being a beginner, but then, in the finale, the Admiral also uses a fire-based weapon against it as well. Honestly, the action scenes look amazing, but they're so divorced from the internal logic of the games. Artemis ultimately returns to Earth, accompanied by the Hunter, the Admiral, and the Rathalos, and following a rampage that sees it wipe out more soldiers, they use flares and explosive arrows to defeat it. This is when I realized how much this movie reminded me of the Resident Evil series spawned by Paul W.S. Anderson, also featuring Jovovich. While I have a soft spot for the first 3 films in the series, they make no sense in the context of the games, or make any effort to be faithful to the source material. The movie very obviously sets itself up for a sequel, and blue balls us by cutting away just as they're about to battle an Elder Dragon. Worse than this is the fact that Artemis decides to go back to the New World, making the motivation of the hero's journey in the film we'd witnessed completely moot. According to Jovovich, Anderson already began writing a sequel script before the first was even released, but after making only $37 million at the box office against a $60 million budget, it's unlikely we'll be seeing a follow-up anytime soon. While the film makes a bit of an effort to incorporate familiar elements, it doesn't accurately show what the Monster Hunter games and their world are all about, and as a result, I think it's ultimately a fantastic example of how to fail at adaptation. Well, that's all for today folks. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay up to date on all my content, and yeah, if you have any other suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
You know what I'm gonna do next time you're dying in the desert? Nothing.